Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 40,000, which we expect Creative Assembly to be announcing by the end of this year, very likely in early December. What CA has stated officially is that they are going to announce what they're working on in terms of future projects, a fantasy project, and a historical project. As far as a historical game goes, it might very well be medieval free, but we don't know for certain. There's various possibilities. As far as a fantasy project goes, I'm fairly certain at this stage it is going to be 40,000. And not just because we're getting a bunch of leaks from various peoples, but because very simple logic from game developers. 40,000 right now out of the IPs that Creative Assembly could go for is the most sensical one. Yes, you have Old World, yes, you have Age of Sigmar, yes, you have different other IPs, but when you look at the market situation, and you can bet that CA is absolutely deciding these things based on market conditions, it is 40,000 that is in the spotlight right now. You have Astartes 2, you have Warhammer Plus, you have the Amazon series, you have the success of Space Marine 2, you have Dawn of War 4, you have Mechanicus 2. I think it would be ridiculous for Creative Assembly to ignore the market conditions just to, say, release an Old World game or an Age of Sigmar game. But who knows? Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. We'll find out in early December this year. But with regards to Total War 40K, Chapter Master Valrak did another video from a more credible source. So he did a video talking about like how 40K Total War is going to have a Helldivers mode. And on that subject of Helldivers mode, what that meant is a galactic war. So it's not about like third-person shooting or anything like that. It's still going to be a strategy game, but it's more going to be a mode where you have an army, you take that army from planet to planet, you have missions, you find missions, and you have this galactic campaign. That's the key feature of Helldivers 2, and that might be one of the key features of 40K. Remains to be seen on that subject. But he also apparently got more information from a more credible source than the one that he previously got. I'm sure that there was absolutely a reaction in at least Games Workshop or Creative Assembly because of that video he did. And that's the reason he's getting more information. Now, what he was told is, well, various things, various important things, like customization of your character referenced in a way like, oh, look at what they did with the Demon Prince in Warhammer 3. I hope not. That's its own discussion for another video. But what I want to talk about is what kind of factions, what kind of races we're going to have in the game, apparently. So initially, it was what Valrak was told is that it's going to be Space Marines, it's going to be Chaos Space Marines, Eldar, and Orcs. That's a fairly sensible lineup. But even then, I wonder, it's like, okay, what about the Imperial Guard? If we're going to have a galaxy map, and apparently we're going to go from planet to planet, even, I imagine, for a single-player campaign, not just Galactic War. But then you have to ask, okay, what about the Imperial Guard? Because, like, Space Marines, they're limited in number. But what Valrak was recently told, and apparently this was the case a while ago, so subject to change, but what he was told by a person who saw this a while ago is that it's going to be Space Marines, it's going to be Eldar, it's going to be Orcs, and it's going to be Imperial Guard. Now, that makes a lot more sense from my perspective than not having Imperial Guard and having Chaos. But of course, you do get a very strong case of deja vu with this, in more ways than one. For instance, back before Warhammer 1 was officially announced, or even when it was teased but we didn't know for certain how it was going to work, there were a lot of people that were claiming, oh, Total War can't handle this, it's not going to have flying units, it's not going to have magic, it's not going to have heroes, it's not going to have monsters, it's not going to have single entities. All those things, those were big discussion points back in the day on Total War Center, on the official Total War forums. And then, of course, Total War Warhammer came out with all of these things. And another thing that a lot of people didn't expect, 64-bit support. So Warhammer 1 ran significantly better than any other Total War that had come out up until that point. But just goes to show what the Total War fan base at that time believed in. And that's kind of the point to make on this subject. People are skeptical, including myself. Like, I'm very skeptical on how they will do the battles. But just because we're skeptical that Creative Assembly could pull it off doesn't mean they won't try. Like, them doing magic flying units, monsters, single entities, heroes, etc. That was certainly a significant step forward for them as a game developer. But I imagine it's going to be the same. Also, kind of worth reminding people that Creative Assembly has made all kinds of different games over the years. Like, you look at Alien Isolation as a perfect example of how they can do something very different. Or other stuff that they've done. It's not just the Total War that we know. There's other things that they've done or tried to do. I mean, this is a company that tried to do Hyenas. And this is also a company that has done strategy games in different ways than Total War. That's the big point. But the real controversy, if you will, is that we're not going to have playable chaos at launch. And that's where I'm reminded of what happened in Warhammer 1. And from my perspective, the single worst decision that Creative Assembly has ever made in the history of Warhammer games. Their original plan, based on what we know, was they were not going to have playable chaos at the launch of the game. Chaos was going to be the end game, and I imagine Norska was still going to be there on the campaign map, but they were not going to be playable on that campaign map. Instead, what CA originally planned, we were going to have the 4 races, so Empire, Dwarves, Greenskins, and Vampire Counts. And Bretonnia was supposed to be the Day 1 DLC faction, with Chaos being the endgame Crisis. That was their original plan. But then when they announced that Warhammer 1 is not going to have playable Chaos on launch, there was a huge controversy. And what did CA do in response to that? They canceled Bretonnia being a Day 1 DLC faction, which ended up hurting Bretonnia in a lot of ways to this day, and instead made playable Chaos as the Day 1 DLC faction, which in itself was a major freaking controversy. But the important thing, though, beyond the controversy, the price point, which, yeah, that's pretty terrible, what ended up happening is that because of the way Chaos was added in the campaign map, it ended up being complete garbage as a faction to play for many years. And hopefully that's something CA avoids. I'm perfectly fine with the idea of Chaos not being playable at launch. That's perfectly well and good. You look at Dawn of War 1 even. You didn't have a playable Chaos campaign. You did have Chaos in Skirmish. You did have them to fight in the campaign, but having them as a playable campaign, that took until Dark Crusade for them to, well, not really Winter Assault, though that was more of a Greenskin Chaos combination of a campaign. But really, I would say the proper Chaos campaign really came in Dark Crusade. And that's the big point. In Dawn of War 2, you didn't have Chaos at launch at all. In Dawn of War 3, you don't have Chaos, though Dawn of War 3 doesn't exist. But you understand the point. It's fine to not have Chaos at launch. You can have a really good Warhammer 40k game without Chaos at launch. You can look at Battlefleet Gothic as well. Battlefleet Gothic does not have Chaos at launch. So, kind of important point on that. It's a DLC. Like, you do have Chaos to deal with in both Battlefleet Gothic Armada 1 and 2 in the campaigns, in every campaign in 2, but having a playable Chaos campaign, that's a DLC for Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. And that might very well end up being the case for Total War 40k. Also because Chaos is a dark reflection of what Space Marines and Imperial Guards are. Well, also Dark Mechanicus versus Mechanicus, so I imagine if they add the Adeptus Mechanicus at one point, then we would get Dark Mechanicus with Chaos Titans. Assuming they are looking to do Titans, which I think would be a very questionable thing if they didn't do Titans in a Total War 40k video game. That is my perspective on that matter. But let me know what you guys think about all of this. What is your perspective? Do you think it's important to have Chaos at launch? But I do, or not. But I think it's just important to avoid the shit show that we ended up having with Chaos in Warhammer 1. Let's not go for that again. Costin, signing out.